Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're breaking down the latest regulatory changes hitting UK businesses and exactly what you need to do to stay compliant. Whether you're running a small startup, managing a growing enterprise, or advising corporate clients, the ground beneath you is shifting right now. The UK government is fundamentally changing how companies are registered, how financials are reported, and crucially, who gets held accountable when things go wrong. So let's dive right in with a critical question that really sits at the heart of all these changes. Is the era of corporate secrecy finally over? For decades, opaque corporate structures and, let's face it, pretty minimal reporting requirements have sometimes allowed bad actors to just hide in plain sight. But the underlying threat of economic crime has pushed legislators to finally dismantle these shadows. What we're looking at today is a complete systemic rewiring of the rules. The goal? To force everything out to the light. And that brings us to the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, or ECCTA, which officially became law on October 26, 2023. Now, this isn't just a minor update to some obscure bureaucratic filing system, all right? This act is a heavy-duty weapon against economic crime. Its primary goal is to drag Companies House firmly into the 21st century, transforming it from a passive library of documents into a highly active gatekeeper of corporate data. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be covering 1. Tackling UK economic crime, 2. Saying goodbye to abridged accounts, 3. The digital delivery push, 4. Disclosing directors' loans, and 5. Failure to prevent fraud. All right, Part 1. Tackling UK economic crime and empowering Companies House. These specific measures are literally designed to lift the veil of corporate anonymity right from the get-go. We're talking about mandatory identity verification checks for all new and existing registered company directors, meaning you can no longer just hide behind a shell company with a fictitious name. On top of that, Companies House now has much greater powers to proactively query suspicious information, run stronger checks on proposed company names, and utilize far more effective investigation and enforcement powers. The days of simply rubber-stamping paperwork without a second glance? Yeah, those are officially over. Moving right along to Section 2. Goodbye to abridged accounts, the end of hiding. So, under the old rules, small companies could prepare and file these stripped-down abridged accounts. This was a handy way for many businesses to keep their gross margins and operating costs totally hidden from competitors, creditors, and the public. But look at the new reality. Small companies must now file both a full profit and loss account and a director's report. If you're a small business owner, your financial health is going to be far more visible than ever before. Sure, your competitors are going to see a lot more of your numbers, but more importantly, so will the people trying to verify your legitimacy. Now, micro-entities do get a slight exception here. They can opt out of the director's report, but the overall demand for detailed disclosure is way stricter across the board. Every micro-entity still has to file that P&L. Now, there is a fascinating caveat from the source material. The Act actually includes regulatory powers that might keep some P&L accounts off the public register in specific circumstances, though exactly how that's going to play out is still being ironed out. Furthermore, if you're claiming an audit exemption, you can't just tick a generic box anymore. Directors must explicitly identify the exact exemption being taken and officially confirm the company is actually eligible for it. It's all about forcing active responsibility. Section 3. The digital delivery push and the move to software-only filing. Right now, you're currently in a compliance grace period before paper filing becomes entirely obsolete. The Act passed back in October 2023, and early 2024 saw the arrival of the secondary legislation needed to really give these rules teeth. But the massive takeaway for your day-to-day operational workflow is that transition period. Over the next 2 to 3 years, authority transfers to the registrar to require documents to be delivered electronically. We're looking at a phased transition to mandatory, software-only electronic filing. If your business is still relying on paper records and manual mailings, consider this a very strict countdown to modernize your systems. Which brings us to Section 4, Disclosing Directors' Loans and the Updates to the Companies Act. So what happens when a director borrows money? Think of it like dipping into the company piggy bank. Under these stricter transparency frameworks, you absolutely cannot just take the money without leaving a very clear, meticulously detailed paper trail. The era of treating a corporate account as a casual personal overdraft is being heavily regulated. And the sheer level of granular detail required here is pretty fascinating. You have to disclose material items of expenditure or repayment. More importantly, dissimilar expenses can no longer be aggregated. You can't just lump a personal loan for a car and a temporary float for a business trip into one vague miscellaneous director expenses line item. No way. They must be disclosed separately as a note. And perhaps the most vital point here, you must disclose the maximum amounts which were overdrawn during the year. This effectively kills window dressing. You know, the practice of a director borrowing heavily all year, paying it back right before the reporting period ends to show a zero balance, and then just borrowing it right back the very next day. Whatever disclosures made in the full financial statements must also be made in the abbreviated ones. You simply cannot hide the highest balance you owed. Finally, Section 5, failure to prevent fraud, or what I like to call the ultimate accountability. Failure to prevent fraud. This stark phrase really acts as the climax of the entire legislation. It represents a massive philosophical shift in UK corporate law because it holds companies directly accountable if they profit from internal deception. It's no longer just the rogue employee who faces the music. The spotlight is now pointed directly at the organization itself. Basically, ignorance is no longer a defense. If a specified fraud offense is committed by an employee or an agent and your large company did not have reasonable fraud prevention procedures in place, the company itself is legally liable. You can't just throw up your hands and say, hey, we had no idea they were doing that. The law now explicitly requires you to proactively establish systems to prevent it. If you benefit from the fraud and you didn't try to stop it, you are completely on the hook. So why does this all matter to you? Well, because as we've seen throughout this explainer, from identity verification at Companies House, to the death of abridged accounts, to software-only filing, and strict liability for fraud, the grace period for corporate opacity is ending. The overarching theme of the ECCTA is absolute accountability. It leaves every director, accountant, and business owner having to ask themselves one final, urgent question. Is your business truly prepared for the transparency of a 21st century economy? I highly recommend taking a hard look at your compliance procedures today because the spotlight is already turned on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.